can start. Johnny is not here. She is in an emergency meeting of some sort. I don't know. She told me that she will be here. And the essay questions are not ready yet. So you're very welcome. So we continue with Leotard, which Johnny told me you liked a lot last week. Did you? Not really.
We spent more time talking about simulacrum than we did about tensor or anything else.
Did you try to read it?
Yeah, we did a kind of opening up of the.
Okay, because then
ephemeral.
it's not far from simulacrum. Let's start off simulacrum then. What have you got as simulacrum? How did you understand it?
Well, it's a copy that's presented as, instead of the real, as the real. It's a hyperreal, where the real falls away.
What's his name?
Baudrillard.
Baudrillard, I think, yeah. So is everybody on the same page with this idea? With this notion? Something that pretends to be real, simulates a reality that it doesn't have. Then Baudrillard goes around the difference of simulating and dissimulating. The simulacrum pretends to be what it is not. It's not covering something that doesn't want to be seen. Two different. So it is basically an image without a body. Now, the simulacrum, well, is that Leotard might be tangentially touching upon, is much more radical than this notion, because it's something that is without even mentioning the fact that it is in the body, it just stays together. And try to probably go to unravel this going through it. Since it is a very dense text, I think that I can try to introduce it briefly in the first chapter, the Great Ephemeral Scheme, and then we'll read bits and we'll try to comment on that, rather than I just talking to you in answer first. What Leotard was, if one can use the expression, it's very simplistic, was a Marxist, an orthodox Marxist, before arriving at this group. And then he started working in between Marxism and Freud. And there is indeed a collection of texts that is called driftworks, going from taking Freud and Marx on an equal level, and drifting off them, see where their ideas could take one. And then progressively he identifies that there is a problem with what he calls an economy. We think an economy is something that works around an equal sign. Well, for this much, there must be that much. These costs X, or in terms of energy, the more you use, the less you have, the more fuel we burn, the more CO2 we get. At a certain point will be no more fuel and just 100% CO2. This idea that there is a totality and you are somewhere in that totality, like a cursor that you can move one way or the other. And then so therefore you can extinguish it all. But he takes these to a much more extreme and powerful point and sees, and actually it's not just a light interpretation, it goes on to explain the relationship between a sign and a meaning, an image and a body, or an image and its sense, a word and its meaning, which was the great structuralist move that he was moving away from, as an economy as well. So sign, meaning, word, name, body, especially name, body, name, object, name, essence, which was the problem of philosophy throughout the centuries before him, is an economy. So if it is an economy, if the name and the body are held together by an equal sign, they are obviously separate objects held together by an equal sign, and together they create a whole, a totality, and they exclude everything else. But they exist because of that sign in between. They somehow present that sign in between as an extra third space, cut, keep the two apart, keeps the two apart and guarantees their existence as separate objects. And these economy around the equal sign or jumping over this cut is an economy of representation. Up to here is like a standard, straightforward thing. The name stands in for something else, the image stands in for something else. Photography is allegedly directly representing whatever it photographs. One makes a piece of art and immediately is asked what does it mean, as if there were a meaning that the art is representing. Well, we know that if there is a meaning, there can be many variations of it, many interpretations, and very often actually the opposite. One explores and tries things out until one finds a solution that seems to be very interesting because it keeps raising questions and it stays together. So meaning is something, if you like, if you want to say that there is a meaning, the meaning keeps coming off it. And you can constantly pick at it and find new ways of interpreting it rather than saying, well, there was a meaning and here it is, how it is represented through sculpture, to installation, performance. All these kind of separations come from the idea of setting the economy going, the equal sign going. Is it clear until now?
So the sign now takes in the place of the equal sign.
No, the equal sign, yes and no. You have to. Can you articulate that? Because it might
just
be
in
right,
terms of what
actually.
I'm thinking of, the signifier sign and signified. So the sign holds the signifier and the signified together, and it's the mediator, but also holds them apart. But then, in terms of it being a sign and it being representational, it always refers. It's just continually referring onwards. It never really, because what are they? He talks about the theatre being hollow, i.e. there's no material. It's just representational. So in that sense, does the sign then replace the equal sign?
Not entirely, not exactly. Let's break down what I believe you just said. On one side, there is the structuralist notion of the sign, which is sign as signified and signifier. The two together constitute a sign. The famous example of Saussure about this is the word horse and the animal. The horse as the animal. The two kept together are the sign for the horse in our culture, in our discourse, in our language. Then one step further is that the sign, yes, constantly bridges, but then it becomes extremely delicate what it constantly bridges, because if we have just, to stay with the structuralist, if we have just seen that the name and the object, Andre and you, the person that is there, are the sign for Andre altogether, then what is that sign bridging towards? Because you're already all there in a certain way. And it is the interpretation that Lyotard starts making of it, to jump to the end of the seminar, if you like. He's taking the equation Andre and the person you are, or the horse and the animal, and takes away one of the two terms. So one has the equal and the name. And this obviously would look like a simulacrum, but he will show us that instead it isn't at all, because it will turn inside out entirely the whole game. And this is why it becomes very, very interesting for art. And to give away who the murderer is, he is basically saying that what we like is not giving a body or an image to a certain meaning we have in our mind. What we like is representing, is giving image to things. So, in other words, we like spending time in the studio. We don't really care in the end what kind of hammock, what kind of work, the meaning of the work will come out. What we like is, what we enjoy, to use a better expression, is the process of building that meaning. Does it make sense? Does it make more sense? I don't know, from an artistic point of view. I take a lot of photographs. I care less about what's in the picture than the whole process of photographing. I still use film for processing the film, everything like that. But there is a pleasure in all that. And this is why this is called the libidinal economy. And it will become a very special kind of economy, because rather than holding together two terms, it will, it's an economy that somehow serves on the equal side and like staying on this transition. And it's not an easy position at all for what does it make sense to everybody, this sort of little, because it's, then we can take it apart and look inside it in the various steps that Yotar makes to describe it. But, this is like the beginning and the end of what he's trying to say. Okay. So what have you taken of the entertaining description of the opening up the libidinal surface with all these sexual tones that are in there? Is just an oddity to you, or do you see? Obviously, it is a metaphor, but it's a metaphor up to a point.
Because it can't really be so much of a metaphor, because if it's a metaphor, it becomes representational again, and then that, where was it? It falls flat if it becomes representational.
It would do what he is trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Exactly. But nevertheless, it's a problem of all the postmodernists. There is the same problem to come up with this great war against the presentation and then the use of language. It's very interesting to do. But let's leaving that work aside. Halfway to the second paragraph, he quotes Bellmer. Is anybody familiar with the word Hans Bellmer? Well, no, the Chapman brothers had invented nothing. Bellmer was making dolls that had their body multiplied or folded over like mirrors, so you would have legs, and then from the waist up another pair of legs. And they were highly sexual, often vaguely referring to girl, female bodies of dimension at times. I mean, they were girl bodies, but adult size. So there were a number of these, they were all tied up, or often tied up. So there are a number of elements in the imagery of folding over the body, of multiplying the folds. And if at the beginning of the second paragraph, has anybody got the text?
Yeah.
Would you read it?
Read it.
Yes.
Which word?
At the beginning, and these not all.
And this is not all.
Yeah.
And this is not all, far from it. Connected onto these lips, a second mouth is necessary.
Sorry. Second mouth is necessary. Just slow, you were going very
Slow,
fast.
sorry. I thought you said stop. A third, a great number of other mouths, vulvas, nipples, and adjoining the skin of the fingertips, scraped by the nails. Perhaps there should be huge silken beaches of skin, taken from the inside of the thighs, the base of the neck, or from the strings of a guitar. And against the palm, all latticed with nerves and creased like a yellowed leaf, set potter's clays, or even hard wooden handles encrusted with jewels, or a steering wheel, or a drifter's sail, are perhaps required. Don't forget to add to the tongue, and all the pieces of the vocal apparatus, all the sounds of which they are capable, and moreover the whole selected network of sounds, that is, the phonological system. But this too belongs to the libidinal body, like colours that must be added to retinas, like certain particles to the epidermis, like some particularly favoured smells to the nasal cavities, like preferred words and syntaxes to the mouths which utter them and to the hands which write them. It is not enough, you see, to say like Belmer, that the fold in the armpit of the child, dreamily intent, her elbow on the table and chin in her hand, could count as valoir pour the folds of her groin, or even as the juncture of the lips of her sex. The question of counting as don't urge us to ask it, far less to resolve it. It is not a part of the body. Of what body? The organic body, organised with survival as its goal, against what excites it to death, assured against riot and agitation, not a part which comes to be substituted for another part, like, for example, in the case of this little girl, the fleshiness of the arm for that of the thighs, and its faint fold for the vaginal slit. It is not this displacement of parts, recognisable in the organic body of political economy, itself initially assembled from differentiated and appropriated parts, the latter never being without the former, that we first need to consider. Stop?
No, just one more sentence.
Such displacement, whose function is representation, substitution, presupposes a bodily unity upon which it is inscribed through transgression.
There is no need to begin with transgression. We must go immediately to the very limits of cruelty, perform the exertion of polymorpha, and spread out the immense membrane of the libidinal body, which is quite different to a frame. So I think that after he mentions Belmer and the notion of counting as, and then an organic body where you can substitute one part for another, so that's still a political economy. That's still an economy that functions, that has both terms of the equation. You can still have these for that. And instead he says, this is not what we need to consider. In such displacement, replacing one thing for the next, whose function is representation, substitution, presupposing bodily unity, upon which it is inscribed through transgression. What Lyotard aims at here, in parallel with Deleuze and Guattari writing Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism, Schizophrenia in the same years, probably exactly the same year, 1974, is a point where they're saying all the attempts to subvert the order of culture and society, political order, that straightforward Marxism had brought, cannot work if the unity of the subject is also not broken down. If we can still, if we still think of the subject as an a priori unity on which everything else is built, like the basic brick of society, the basic brick of culture, the basic element of the discourse. If this is not opened up, broken down is probably not the right expression, if this is not opened up into something that doesn't have an inside and an outside, there is no hope in subverting the other game, which was proposed to us as the bigger game, the game outside the person, the game society, but is actually a consequence of having established this original unity as the base. Now, it's extremely problematic or extremely dangerous, and it's not by chance is using the expression cruelty, but opening up our unity. Here he speaks in physical fleshy terms, and it is absolutely one way of taking it, but nevertheless, we were just now discussing the problems of Ukraine and the invasion, opening up our unity, opening up the individual as it was proposed by Enlightenment as a willing person that is endowed with free will, possibility of decision, and therefore participating in democracy. If you take that ability to count for one away, immediately everything starts shifting and going out of place, and it's a very strange, dangerous place to be. So what undermining the unity of the subject, as he's proposing, is radical, fundamental for him, and at the same time it's an exciting and very, very dangerous position. If what he says in line earlier, where is it? About the body, that the organic body organized with survival as its goal against what excites it to death, is a strange combination of something that excites the body to death. So something that excites the body should be pleasurable.
Sorry to interrupt, but isn't Isn't there an expression in French for orgasm that's a small death or something?
Mhm. Well,
Petit
that's
ball,
it.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are all playing this French.
Right.
He's using that, but it's not as simple as that. He's playing in this notion of unity and in this structure of signifier and signified, name and body, noun, which is even wider than name as a concept, and the object it refers to. He is feeding into it rather brutally the Freudian notion of an alleged balance between conscious and unconscious, which Freud himself says is not an even balance, because you could say that the unconscious works as the barrier between the conscious and something that is not the other side. So he starts mixing it all up to say, well, there is obviously a drive towards excitement or pleasure, a positive drive for us, but there is also a destructive one, and the two are flowing into each other, and they can excite the body to death. So instead of resisting that, keeping the organism in place, doing all the right steps to produce the right kind of work, saving enough money for the rainy days, all these things, is to say, well, let's just run with it, and enjoy and consume as fast as we can, even faster than we will be allowed to, in order to see where this can take us. He's speaking very much of the figure of the artist. This is why we're reading it. It is very open to be seen as the figure of the artist, where experimentation is more important than the intention of making, of what you're going to make. So this is why he introduces the idea of a libidinal body. And a body that he has described as a surface that is being opened precisely from all the points that are supposed to be passages from inside and outside. Obviously, he enjoys very much the description of coming out of the sex and the mouth and the ears and the eyes. All these, so it's painful to read it. But that's precisely the point. You say, well, these transition, this step he is proposing, is certainly not easy at all. And whether one is directly into performance of this sort, or one is just put his or her life on the edge in making art, taking risks, changing countries, taking risks with money, with certainty, with friends, with the image of oneself, and then trying even more and going further with that. That's precisely what we're saying. That's trying to break down the notion of a here and a there and just dwell on the outer boundary of it. If we step back a bit, is also feeding off Heidegger, but instead of all the abstract ontological problem of beings, small b and big beings, big being, singular, as infinity, he is adopting the idea of a drive that keeps moving and throwing everything up, and one that wants to close down. So he's taking somehow the structure from Heidegger, but then he sees Freud as far more useful in terms of what terms are coming to, what concepts are coming to. And then he goes on to say that this surface of the body opened up is a Moebius strip. Does it make any sense to you? And why he says a Moebius strip, and why with the Moebius strip there is no inside and outside. So it might seem that the fold of the mouth or the sex are leading across something, but in reality it's just a fold or a bump or a crease in a continuous surface. So what is introducing here is that the notion that there isn't a beyond to the boundary that one has, that one encounters. There isn't a beyond, and also there isn't an in between. And this is why it gets to it starts speaking of the zero. But we'll get there in a moment. These pieces with the variable geometry. And then there is a whole paragraph about the theater, which you mentioned, that they mentioned. Did this image of the theater make sense?
Yeah, can I ask about that?
Mm-hmm.
And just to test my understanding of it,
Mm-hmm.
is, so you have this kind of spinning Mobius
Mm-hmm.
strip, and you have this bar, this disjunctive bar
Mm-hmm.
that kind of operates on it or something as well. And it's from my understanding, from not it wanting to be a metaphor, but from my understanding as a metaphor, is about people getting stuck on this one idea and kind of excluding everything else, so it becomes this and not this, and them kind of forming this theatre around themselves where they kind of exclude everything else, all the other possibilities that could be happening on this Mobius strip in their lives. And in that sense, they close themselves off in this six-sided box,
Mm-hmm.
which is an empty theatre. But that still exists somehow on this ephemeral plane.
I saw it more as the stage auditorium thing he's
Mhm.
talking about, the idea of the audience being separate from the stage, that sort of, when he's talking about the sides, you know, that there's a sort of an invisible fourth wall, if you
Mhm.
like, and that the Mobius strip sort of gets beyond that, that there, am I making any sense?
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm not, but he's not saying exactly that. Anybody else wants to have a go at it? If,
in the theatre bit or
yeah,
the band. I mean, I thought the band was more the discussion with it being like it's one-dimensional, but it rotates. Is that it's an economy that keeps moving.
mm-hmm.
So there's constantly forms of exchange that go on that don't have a typical opposite form of exchange to give it. So you don't say, oh, I exchange like there's not a direct exchange sort of rate, as it were, in that you would get in a political economy that you don't get in the libidinal economy. It's very much draws itself up but doesn't exchange. And it comes back here earlier on talking about doesn't replace itself for something else, but it sort of grows.
You're right. But there is a step in between which I think it is important to clarify. And I cannot find a paragraph where he describes it. Because he introduced the notion of dispositive, which roughly could be translated in English as device, apparatus. It's a term that is common to Foucault as well, but without going somewhere else. Something,
I think when he starts talking about zero.
yes, but it comes back to it twice.
It starts with, it is certainly not a libidinal theatre then.
Mhm.
And it's in the same paragraph when dispositif is for the first time
Yes.
introduced. The representative chamber is an energetic apparatus, dispositif.
Okay, well, can you read it then?
The whole paragraph or from the...
It is certainly not a libidinal theatre, and then we put enough emphasis to the representative chamber. Mhm.
It is certainly not a libidinal theatre then. No density, intensities running here and there, setting up, escaping, without ever being imprisoned in the volume of the stage auditorium. Theatricality and representation, far from having to be taken as libidinal gifts. Fortiori metaphysical. Sorry, I don't know what a fortiori means.
Fortiori means is a Latin expression that it is
Chance?
No, they are necessarily. It's like a priori, I mean something that logically exists before whatever is given. These are necessarily by strength.
Metaphysical. Result from a certain labour of the labyrinthine and Merbian band. A labour which prints these particular folds and twists, the effect of which is a box closed upon itself, filtering impulses and allowing only those to appear on the stage which come from what will come to be known as the exterior, satisfying the conditions of interiority.
Okay. Then we read the other one, then we'll go back to the first part. Okay.
The representative chamber is an energetic dispositive. So the box actually is the ephemeral skin in Möbius strip moving all the time, and then it somehow creates the unit, which is
well,
box.
it somehow creates the unit is not a generic or a vague way. It's saying theatricality and representation, apart from having to be taken as libidinal givens, a fortiori metaphysical, which means libidinal givens. Givens is something that is there, we encounter it as already there, and then he specifies, and if it is already there as in this mode as I am discussing it, then it is going to be metaphysical. It's something that is the origin, the cause, and the end of everything that is happening. These they result from a certain labor of the labyrinthine and Moebian band. Labor in this case is not any expression. It's speaking of an economy. It's speaking of labor as in work, something that would be paid and something that produces wealth, something that produces value or meaning. There is this, it's very important, the language is very poetic, if you like, here. A labor which prints these particular folds and twists, the effect of which is a box closed upon itself. So what is happening here is very interesting. Now, we just said the body is all open. It is an infinite strip that doesn't have inside and outside, that turns and would be open to everything. And how funny, its work is building up a closed box, which separates
Interior from exterior.
exterior from exterior, art from non-art. Literally setting the frame around things. And again, another element that is important to keep in mind here. Freud speaks of the work of dreams, or by association the work of art, but also the whole conscious activity as staging. There is an element of having what one has accumulated in experience, emotions, images, words, sounds, whatever you want, and organizing it on the stage. So that this is very important, because this is where it takes it from, and then he moves, it turns it against even Freud and everything else to create a different kind of economy, or to radicalize it. The analysis that Freud makes of the functioning of the person is what appears as going over a threshold from an inside, an unconscious, and an outside, the conscious life and language, organized time marker chronologically. And this other area of the unconscious, where everything should be dark and undescribable. But one should not think that the dark and undescribable unconscious, the realm of dreams, has an organization of its own which is translated into the language of the wake. Is that on the other side, the supposed other side, is just pure energy somehow. And what appears to be a translation is actually a generative, a creative activity, which gives it shape, dimensions. since we are saying we don't have to make representation of things, okay, that's the old problem Lyotard is discussing here is that this is the equal sign, or the separation, if you like. And he's saying everything has been built around these. It would have been the principle of identity for some, it would have been the sign and meaning on the other, it would be image and reality. You name it, a name for noun and object. And then again, in case of Freud, it would be the conscious and the unconscious. But this is where it becomes very delicate, and it is actually not like this. What seems to be the unconscious from this point of view is actually being built here, Freud says. Now let's step back to what we were looking at the beginning of the seminar, thinking of art making. The artist that is here does not want to make meaning X that is here, enjoys spending time in the studio. And then whatever falls out of these is an art piece that somebody else said, oh, this is very interesting, makes me think of that actually, that is related to the other thing. And oh, but you can see it, oh, that's new, you never know what has ever used this concept of this material or this new technology in this way. And there you have the value of the piece. So the idea that there is outside and inside, whichever sides you want to have them, is broken down, or better, is flattened onto the skin or a moment of the present where one likes to dwell, and is pleasure to dwell there, but it's very painful to break down all the other structure in order to get there. So, am I saying something theoretic, or it rings a bell?
Just to go
Oh, sorry, you couldn't.
no, that's okay. When Freud talked about things like dream work,
Yes.
that they were ways of making sort of unpalatable truths,
Mm-hmm.
which in the unconscious unpalatable truths, sort of dealable in a way of coping with them.
Mm-hmm.
So you convert them into something which is either nonsensical or something that you can find acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any sort of this sort of process of so there's Freud's reason for doing that? He had something. He had a purpose for doing it. It wasn't just sort of random that there's this sort of seething mass of sort of horrible things going on, and sometimes one of them escapes. There was a sort of a definite active process of censoring or dream work.
Yes, but it's all coming. I'm not that knowledgeable with Freud, so but especially for the dream work, in the chapter where it describes all the shifts and superimposition, folding over, all those bits. In my understanding, is where if we take this part as the language, nouns, conscious, image, and what is the images of representation, what we have, the words for the object on the side. All the elements that concur into the dream work come from here. Both the image used, the emotion censored, and the value that censored is all on this side. On this side, if there will be anything on this side, but we are working as if there will be something here. This as if is the simulacrum we opened up with. It is actually an energy that is completely raw, doesn't have a shape. Just there was once a very ridiculous video that I wanted to represent this. There was a character that wanted, and just wanted, didn't want anything specific, just wanted. And if you want it all, you might end up having too much, and then it becomes self-destructive. This is why Freud has the two principles of desire and left right that constantly, but they're not two principles. It's the same one that can go too fast for its own good. So it is all happening on this side, and it can be, you know, can be a nightmare, it can be a wonderful dream. It doesn't matter, but it doesn't go over on this. But it is the work of staging. Freud calls it the dream work. He speaks of labor here. And what is this labor doing is staging things. And it's very interesting because it's not staging specific shows, so to speak. It's not painting specific paintings. It's not making specific art. Its work is the one of building the stage, the box that he makes. So, and indeed it goes on a little bit later, is saying that we should not be, let's jump ahead for a moment. I believe it is this part. On page 5. But this goes more into detail into the zero. It's basically saying we should not. Yes. Could you go on reading on page 5? Far from taking the great zero as the ontological motive. Yes.
Far from taking the great zero as the ontological motive, imposed on desire forever deferring, representing and simulating everything in an endless postponement, we, libidinal economists, affirm that this zero is itself a figure, part of a powerful dispositive, wise like the God of the Jews and pale like the void of Lao Tzu, a concentratory dispositive de controversion, where, of course, several libidinal positions are formed together, which we make merry in and demonstrating with tact, in disengaging without shock, like Japanese, like blades enmeshed in a fencing match. And we will show not only that it is not necessary to pass through it in order to follow the course of intensities in the on a labyrinth, but moreover that the passage through the zero is itself a particular libidinal cause, that the position of the signifier or of the other is, in the concentratory dispositive, itself an enjoyable position, that the rigor of the law gives more than one person a hard-on, and that this nothing is not a matter of ontological necessity, but of religious fantasy, libidinal then, and as such, moreover, quite acceptable. That is, if it were not, alas, terroristic and deontic. We must model ourselves an affirmative idea of the zero.
Okay.
I mean, having a sentence which is longer than a paragraph, I think is...
Yes, no, it is irritating for this. I always find the way he writes at times it. Try to read again from halfway through it, where after the Japanese blades, mesh fence, but moreover, that the passage through the zero is itself. Read that bit, try to find the sense of it.
Because I kind of underlined for myself bits which I thought were connected. But moreover, that the passage through the zero is itself a particular libidinal cause, that the position of the signifier or the other is in a concentratory dispositive, itself an enjoyable position, and that the rigor of the law gives more than one person a hard-on, and that this nothing is not a matter of ontological necessity, but of religious fantasy, libidinal, then and as such, moreover, quite acceptable. That is, if it were not, alas, terroristic and deontic. The number of commas. So this is why I think it's difficult to read, because there are so many so-called non-essential elements that...
But probably they're not non-essential, and probably...
No, it's from grammatical point of view. in commerce because
Yes.
they're so-called
And
non-essential.
probably is played, if we want to give the benefit of doubt, and I believe we should in some certain extent, is playing with the text the same game he had done before when he was saying, but this is not enough. We should have a second mouth is necessary in a third, and a great number of other mouths and vulvas and nipples, and enjoying it to skin and fin. So it's
He's overloading.
overloading, but also folding things over. But and then he says, but it's not enough to stop at Hans Bellmer's example, where he substitutes one part of the body for another.
So it's not the substitution, it's just each part of the body is the same, is as libidinal as the other. The inside of the nose is as libidinal as the inside and the outside of the ear.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I can understand, this is what he's
But
trying to
yes, but there is also something else, is that he is saying you don't have to think that the nose is in a certain position and then the genital are in another position, in another role, and there is a hierarchy. And then you count points that are parts of the body that are supposed to be the gates between inside the person, the soul, and the world outside, mouth and also the eyes, the ear, the genitals, the anus, all these. No, it says but all these are completely connected. So you can have the lips and the genitals and the fingers all together in the same spot. But then this is also folded and repeated, so you can have several mouths, and this is where the problem with semiotics comes back in, or mouths that act as mouths in some moment and then could temporarily, instead of do something else, see or shit. So there is a shift. What Mark was then saying, the economy where the sign and the signified are no longer fixed, and so it's like they're all floating about, staying together in a big soup. So sometimes they content in one way, sometimes not, sometimes they content two or three at the same time.
I can understand the value of this idea when we're talking about one person.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you start thinking, if you start applying this theory or this vision to society, this is when it becomes incredibly disturbing, because then you're losing your identity and you're losing the boundary.
Yes.
And the desire then becomes the mover of the action. Okay, you know, let's dispose of morality, but then the desire justifies the action because there is no boundary.
Yes, and it's a perfectly right critique to bring to this move. However, what is saying here, before we get there, is a bit more subtle, because there is all this multi-layering and opening up of hierarchies and links, so everything somehow floats. But if you imagine that for a moment gravity would no longer apply to this room, all these and us as well, and we could just move about. Or his description of an orgy is exactly the same thing. But then he says that this desire finds, if you like, a way or a direction or a way of expressing itself, and expressing itself is a very delicate thing that is not correct here, but for the sake of getting there quickly, into building representation, into building the theater where things are ordered. Is what it says, what is it? Sorry, it's another page. Like very fast. And we will show not only that this is not necessary to pass through it, the blades, the libidinal barrier. Moreover, that the passage through the zero, we will go back to the zero in a moment, but the passage through the zero, let's think of it for the time being as the passage from inside and outside. It itself a particular libidinal cause. There is a desire and a pleasure attached to going from in to out or from out to in, and obviously the reference to sex, if you put it like that, is immediate. But the position of the signifier or of the odor, so the signifier is the odor of a body or an object or intensity of meaning, a pleasure, of passion for making things, passion for eating or whatever else. The position of this is in the concentratory dispositive itself an enjoyable jouissive is another technical term from psychoanalysis. Is the enjoyment in its purest forms without strings attached to it. Is itself an enjoyable position. So this going over the threshold, or better, this building a threshold that then can be crossed back and forth, is, he says, in itself, but it's very critical and sarcastic. He says, well, it gives more than one person a hard on, this idea of building a cage. American Beauty, do you remember the movie American Beauty? The white supremacist neo-Nazi that then in the end discovers themselves to be gay. That returning idea that the extreme rigor, the repressing of others, and the discipline applied to oneself is precisely the fear of letting things go as they are described here. So these obsessive, repressive, to use a term that is both political and psychoanalytical, the censoring that you just mentioned, is precisely the keeping things in order, creating an order capability, because otherwise, horror for horrors, I might discover that I desire something that I was taught not to desire, whatever it is. So, the question you bring up on this, that if you open this too much, is dangerous. It is absolutely true. That there is what is his name? Sorry, sometimes my memory for names is de Sade. Marquis de Sade was working along similar lines, but one of the last books he wrote was One Last Effort, French people to become Republican, to break down the authority of the king, was precisely to go through this madness of orgies and sadistic and masochistic actions. Mostly sadistic for this. So there is certainly the problem you raise is there, but at the same time, what he's bringing up here is that the necessity for breaking down, opening up. I insist it's better than opening up than breaking down. I don't know why I use that expression all the time. The unity and the closing, the boxing of the subject inside itself, him or herself, is precisely the problem he's going at and what he wants to unmake, undo. Otherwise, he says in the following passage, so, one falls back. If one thinks that the zero is a problem that needs to be taken away entirely, one falls back into reinstating an economy of some sort in a negative way without controlling it. So we begin the critique of religion. So we begin the destruction of pity. We will seek atheism, terribly intelligent. We have understood that the reintroduction of the zero, that is to say of the negative, in the economy of desire, which is this continuous flow of wanting without even specifying what, is quite simply an accountancy of libidival matters. Now, it's a very derogatory fear of accountancy. It's a petty keeping track of how many people in, how many people out, some are we active or passive in our balance sheet. It's reducing it to these. And what he's saying is that any approach that still thinks of signifiers and signified is an accountancy of life, if you like. But should we circle back a moment to the zero, which I noticed that yes. Can you?
I was just wondering whether I understand what zero is. I wrote there's difference between inner and outer, but
Yes.
but boundary. Not the boundary.
Yes.
The difference, yeah.
But if you between difference and boundary, there can be a lot of space, or to say a big difference. Can you say as well? Can you articulate on these boundary and difference?
Boundary separates. The difference is more flexible, I feeling,
Mhm.
which I cannot verbalize.
I think it's like the zero has no real boundaries or edges. It's sort of like talks about sort of going through it, but there's no sort of actual edge to it. You know, it's sort of
You say there is no actual edge. You say that the boundary separates.
But the difference is more flexible, more, I don't know, more flexible membrane, surface, no, surface, yeah, it is surface. Because between the surface is what separates the outer and the inner.
That's the cut then, isn't it?
mm.
The zero is more like the, like you said, the difference in identity. So it has the adherence, the kind of voidness, but like Sophie said, it has no hard edges. So it's kind of like flying through a cloud. You, at one moment you're not out, you want outside the cloud, then you're kind of somewhere, and then you're in the cloud, and then you're out through the cloud again. But you, at some point, you were in a very different place
Yes,
to
but
where you are and where you were.
before we get to these images, it's not wrong, but it is not, because the argument is so tight here, that becomes a bit of a confusion.
Are we talking about zero as the no thing or the nothing in that way?
Yes.
And it being completely different, isn't it?
It will get to that.
Yeah.
This is why the image of a cloud is not wrong, nor your image of something that has fuzzy edges and your fuzzy edge and you're around it. And if you like, the Moebius strip might be seen as rotating around a center which is no thing, and it's quite impossible to say exactly where it starts or where the thing ends. But what is coming up, what the problem that Dr. describes here as a device, we just spoke about the building of a box, of a closing out, if you like, of the surface, so that the element is an outside and inside, is precisely the installing of a boundary. So much, and he uses zero, and he uses it in a double way, that if this one becomes the zero where there is 1, and then there is 2, and then there is 3, and then -1, -2, -3, as if this would be something, the no thing, but that yet exists somehow, they're separated. But then one falls back into the problem of Heidegger, when you want to find that thing that separates everything else. If it is separating everything else, then it is. But if it is, and it doesn't have any description whatsoever, then it's nothing. And the thing falls, precipitates backward.
So is this when he says it's not of ontological necessity, but of religious fantasy?
Yes.
Well, that's the metaphysical conclusion that Heidegger gets to towards the end of identity and difference, isn't it? That is just a fantasy that kind of, well, you said before, I can't remember now. It's something that creates itself and sustains itself.
Can you read that sentence? I cannot find it now. Which page is it on?
It's 5, it's to the end of that.
So we will begin the
paragraph.
critique of religion.
Yes. So we re-begin the critique of religion.
Where do you want me to read from? The position of the signifier or of the other is, in the concentratory dispositif, itself an enjoyable position, that the rigour of the law gives more than one person a hard-on, and that this nothing is not a matter of ontological necessity, but of religious fantasy, libidinal then, and as such, moreover, quite acceptable. That is, if it were not, alas, terroristic and deonic.
So deontic. So it seems acceptable, this exciting installing of rigor, but it is at the same time terroristic. And deontic is a bit like it's the introduction of the ethic of whatever practice one is in this case. But what I think is important here is how it pairs up signifier and the order. Have you got any idea about this funny thing, especially following the notion of censorship that was brought up earlier. Where is it?
Well,
That's here.
if we're just talking about sign and signifier and the signifier and the other, depending on who you're looking at, I mean, the absolute other for Kierkegaard would have been God. The other for Heidegger would just be the kind of absolute different to.
Sorry, not exactly. You can stay closer to home somehow.
Right.
Isn't it more, isn't he talking, it's a the other, not other, but the other. So isn't it?
Yeah, but they're both
Of the signifier and the other, I mean the signifier in language and representation
Mhm.
is like the what creates the thought or the idea in language. It would be the word, and then you would say tree to tree as
Mhm.
the word tree rather than the
But
idea.
why is the
tree.
signifier?
Yeah.
That's correct. Why is it paired with the other?
Yeah. Just
Okay, capitalized other, not the. Which is
To
other?
me, to me, it sounds like a religious connotation to
Mhm.
and the word's word
Mhm.
at the beginning, and the word is a signifier, so it's to me it's reference back to the religion.
Okay,
To
and
Christianity.
you're actually he actually mentions Christianity at a certain point, saying that that's one of the biggest paradigms that he's trying to take apart. Then we are actually touching upon something that goes through this book and a lot of other works of his. So there is language at the beginning, but what kind of beginning is that, you think?
So again,
do
if
you
we
mean that's
go,
an a priori beginning?
No,
Metaphysical.
Okay.
if we go back to Christianity, this is how the world started,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah, the word is God.
With the word, and the word is that ultimate signifier. So everything, according to Christianity, everything is what that signifier, everything is signified by that first word.
Well, the word is God and God is the word. It's that kind of idea, isn't it? If you one
Okay.
embodies the other,
Um,
but that's not
It's-
really what he's talking
No,
about
it's not what he's talking
here.
about. It's not. He's talking about the word or language,
Isn't it?
and
The more like as it's the structures of that, which are
Mhm.
he then talks it as the rigours of the law. So they create this, the signifier and the other, these kind of
you're almost there.
what creates meaning in these sort of.
I believe that the problem of the word and the beginning that you brought up is the key here. If now he speaks of it, far from taking the great zero as an ontological motive, it's ontological, something that speaks of being, of the essence of everything, imposed on desire, forever deferring, living for later, deferring pleasure, not a big problem, but representing and simulating everything in an endless postponement, we, original economists, affirm that this zero is itself a figure, that this separation here, or the equal sign, this thing in between, this boundary you mentioned, this difference, is itself a figure, part of a powerful dispositive. Wise like the God of the Jews and the pale like the God of loud. So it takes in entirely, the whole spectrum of forms of religiosity, from the most strict to the most contemplative. A concentratively dispositive, and in French is circumvention, also carries the idea of like literally drawing a line around and taking it all in, and also to the idea of circumvening somebody, to convince in a sort of cunning way somehow, almost to trick. Where, of course, several libidinal positions are affirmed together, which we make merry the disintricating and demonstrating with tact, in disengaging without shock, like Japanese like Blazer. And then he goes on to say, moreover, what is really important, this zero which is itself a dispositive. Now, is something exciting for some. But what is, and then we go down to find more of these. The zero is a machine. The zero is operating something. There is the product of some sort of labor that is mentioned. So this is why I was insisting so much on the idea of an origin. The word as a signifier is not an absolute original state of things. Is what originates an order of things. Do you see the difference?
Mm-hmm.
If he's talking about a continuous surface where everything is mixed, where mouth and anus can be the same thing, where one and many can be the same thing, where one can be one and many at the same time, and rightly so you said that everything would break down then you put in these very simple things. Say, well, it's actually nothing, it's zero in there. And you draw a line that divides something. And say, well, this is where my body ends, and this is where my body begins. You're not allowed to cross this border without my permission. Or if you cross this border, it will be punishment. In many ways, a set of laws, set of intimacy and public life, and so on. So the idea of adding these, when it's a dispositive, is a device that generates order, is a device that permits staging. And it is very problematic because Lyotard does not suggest for a moment that one does away with all representation and lives on this completely smooth and remixing boiling soup. It's like reducing the planet to magma boiling volcanoes. There wouldn't be life. But it's precisely the idea that this is the origination of an order, not the absolute order of something that it is describing. And this is why then it goes on to say that it keeps shifting from this very abstract thing to say this is politics, this is economics, this is desire, strict desire, but libido in general. And what is here? What is very becomes even more important is the following paragraph, where he writes, where he speaks of the accountancy of political economy. So where was it? Okay, I'll read it again. So we re-begin the critique of religion. So we re-begin the destruction of pity. We will seek atheism, terribly intelligent. We have understood that the reintroduction of the zero, that is to say of the negative, and here Mark was right, but no, this is the partition. This is not that. And then you have a signifier, and the odor. The body will always be the odor of the signifier at this point. Or there will always be an odor of us, whether it is female versus male, the odor of it, those on the other side of the border, gay versus straight, you name it. This has installed the possibility of having an odor. And then you place this cursor wherever you want, so you can decide that we are all part of the same at the other side of the door, or you can bring it here and have all the odor of me because I'm running the seminar today. And then again, you get, Johnny said, make it as wild as you can. So I'm trying to feed in sex images as much as I can, but it's not that sex should be wild, actually. The idea of where you set the boundary of these things. For example, where you set the boundary of how much risk you can take with your art, where you set the boundary of how much you can get physically hurt in the name of your art. All the ethics that stifle research in university at the moment are precisely a problem of where you set the zero. You cannot do this to that. So going on to this, the negative. In the economy of desire is quite simply that of accountancy of individual matters. It is political economy. So having decided what divides this from that is what installed politics. You don't need Tories or Labour, you don't need any of that. You just, by making a separation, you have political problems, I think it's fundamental. It's political economy that is capital, which is both a system of science and a very political thing, and carried even into the sphere of passions. And with this economy of capital, necessarily, and yet again, we have understood that it is piety that counts, piety, sorry, that counts to take its course, the pulsional and passionate dispositive of religiosity, inasmuch as this is identified as the force of luck, capital is religiosity, which is that of money engendering itself, causa sui. Now, I read this because I wanted to get to the force of luck. Luck is another aspect of this problem of setting a boundary or an equal sign with a partition.
Did you say luck?
Luck.
Right.
L-A-C-K.
Luck.
Luck. In terms of, you know that there's supposed to be something over there, which you want over here, you haven't got it yet. So you're lacking it. And once you will have obtained that, then it'll be a whole. This is very basic description, but it comes in endless flavors through Western philosophy. A language that feels is never entirely able to say everything, say completely represent senses, images, body. The unconscious bit, the impossibility. I think that Lacan, which I know even less than Freud, works a lot on this notion of luck, what one wants to obtain and can become transcendental. You never obtain it all, but you strive to, you aim at. But very much economy, the lack of money, the balancing of there's a process of entropy somehow that luck is involved with, as if the ultimate goal of things would be to take it all back on this side of the partition, and therefore being full rather than lacking something. The very fact that this is a very delicate point, but the very fact that to make art we are reading so much philosophy plays upon the same thing, in negative terms, I think, as if art making, all the sensuality needs a verbal explanation to be what it is. Can you not stand
it
on
should
its
make sense, shouldn't it?
Would you not
without
stand?
the-
Why should
yeah.
we? Why philosophers don't need art to explain what they're saying, and we need them? Do they see better, and we see less? Is the art lacking something that only text can explain?
No, I think that great art speaks for itself,
Mm-hmm.
but that the artist has put the meaning behind the work to make it do that, so that they need the philosophy to inform their work. It's not the other way around.
But this is sort of a diversion. I mean, obviously there is a dialogue between the two, but you have to take each as a practice, and then you can feed off it. They can feed off each other. But I always find very strange. Oh, interesting. That there is the theory course for art, but actually the theory course for art is, I would rather, or I would think would be more immediate to look at other artists or to look at other forms of art making. Why are we not using cinema to analyze performance and painting, and we have to read books? So there is still this very problem that the art is explaining is so eradicated in our way of thinking and organizing and negotiating the world that we are dealing with the same problem. The word, the dispositive, the device that organizes and separates, that signifier that it can only exist if it sets up an order over there, is here, right in front of us. And it's what I'm trying to do with my thesis. Undermine is, why should I be reading these when I can do that? But and also because I love these. This is as sensual and as thick. It's not at all a transparent tool that permits us describing that. It works in its own way. But In other words, Lyotard speaks a lot about the onset of modernity, modernity not 20th century, but the 16th century, the Renaissance. The introduction of perspective is organizes space along these similar lines of the signifier, the flat canvas. You remember Durer's machine, where he designs a frame with all the grid and then smaller grid in order to bring what is three-dimensional on two dimensions. Or Jean-Baptiste Albert and Brunelleschi's perspective, which is not how reality is a way of representing reality on 2D. The problem is that then it is projected back onto reality as if this is the true and correct way of representing reality. So then one is trapped in one way of having staged the game of staging. One is trapped in thinking that art is painting. When I did the other seminar, I asked you, the first thing I asked you was, when you say you're an artist, what do people ask you back? What do you do? What do you paint? And it turned out there were two painters in the room. And everybody else was doing other things. But that was the image that is being projected back onto this funny place we are in trying to find new orders for things, or exploring the existing order and altering it a bit to see if it can become more interesting if it works in a different direction. And but it is still captured. That's another key word in all this game, by this device, by this dispositive that organizes and makes it flow in a very specific way, which Lyotard say is a political economy, is the economy of capital, the one that wants to be able to measure everything, so that at the end there could be a monetary value for it. It's not strictly monetary value, it turns it inside out. Capital becomes also a capital of science. It is a regime that represents things in a strict way. So for these, there will be only that and nothing else. Right, so if these costs £2 at Roman coffee at the corner, will always only cost £2, cannot be exchanged for an afternoon of telling jokes. Is everybody familiar with the work of the Time Bank?
Yes.
It's a collective of artists that have set up a project called the Time Bank, where you give a certain amount of time with the skills you have in exchange for something you might need or you might want, but you don't know what it is. So somebody else gives an equal amount of time for with the skills they have, and then you trade. So every time you trade, you have to reassess the value of what you have and that you are offering, and the value of what you're getting in exchange. So an afternoon of telling jokes can be worth nothing, especially if you're a poor joke, or can be worth a lot if you are, to say something banal, you need to be cheered up. So these separation here, I keep going back, zero and equal are standing in for the same, this space in between, but there's also a space that permits pairing one thing with the other, becomes completely fluid. And then you were right when you were saying all your examples of difference being soft, the cloud, signifier and signified shifting position and realigning with order and pairing with other things. That's precisely what they're playing upon. And I think it's a brilliant work they are doing, especially in times of crisis, where all countries are reduced to the percentage of their debt and how much their debt might cost, turning millions of lives in commodities. They are opening it all up again, so we want to negotiate, it can be worth a peanut, a single one, and we'll buy something else or exchange something else for much less. So the notion of signified and signified, or identity and the other, or in and out, are all these economies that play upon a barrier. They need a space in between, they need a cut to stay together, to function. They need a cut in order to be staged and for the play to take place and be repeated, if you like. While what is aiming at is to say that this cut is if you take it as 0 and then you expand it as you were saying, then it becomes, if you like, a known boundary, something that surrounds. We told you toward the end, instead of there being specific word that says, well, here's where it ends. This is the set of rules you have. I was going to say the set of rules I've given you, if God had been speaking, or the set of absolute scientific laws, or the set of social rules that one has. And there is no one. If you go beyond that, then you are an outsider, you are a bandit, you are an enemy, you are heretic, you are gay and to be condemned, whatever. And instead it becomes, your thought aims at something where, when you get to the end, actually, you're at a point where you can remix everything. You get back to the orgy of all the parts of the body boiling up together. And then you can rearrange them as you like, in different orders. And to me, this is extremely interesting because it's part of my critique earlier. Very much describes the position of the artist, where you take all you know and you bring it to a point where it becomes so unstable that then you can give, precipitate it in new orders. And somehow one opens, rather than being in full control, one gives up control as much as one can and then accepts or edits among the results. Obviously, very much depends on the kind of work that each one does. The kind of work that are more, they require more discipline, and other kind of work require less discipline. But there is, even in the most rigorous discipline, there is a point where one delivers oneself to the discipline, especially if it involves traditional skills like drawing from real or sculpting. One has to follow it to the point that you are no longer in control of it. You follow all the rules, and at a certain point that takes you somewhere. That happens. It becomes interesting. Do you recognize your experience in these? Or I am talking about something, not just in this last sentence, but in this idea of not accepting the existing order. Of thinking that these has already been a distribution of things, but the jouissance, the enjoyment, is in setting up forms of distribution. So much as some people are living that and are done with that. What's another thing I wanted to?
Can I just say something when you were talking about time bank and different kinds of economies? Just dawned on me that the libidinal economy, and an economy as something as in Derrida's gift of death, is this kind of this unpaid debt that you can never really fulfill towards God. It becomes a little bit like this deferring sign that always defers onwards. You can't ever completely complete the...
Yes, but for Derrida there is this element, I said, always deferring, or vice versa, something that is always original. You'll never find an origin, but you suppose there is an origin, or you never find the end. You'll never reach the goal, but you act as if you're following the goal. What Lyotard says to me is far more radical. What he's saying is that what we like is playing the game of the feather. We stay on this threshold of the game of the feather, or the game of saying we are looking for an origin. It's in this way the simulacrum that we wrote up at the beginning is, I feel like, a key concept, because it's a game of pretending that we are doing something. And playing that game is what we enjoy doing. Playing that game is what constitutes us. So it is literally surfing on the equal sign between the signifier and the signified, and constantly changing. If you imagine the surfboard being a dial that can switch between the 2 points, the signifier here, the signifier is here. It's constantly turning around in a sort of mad way. Indeed, this is the tensor bar that spins, and when it goes around super fast, no order takes place. There is too much energy, and then at some point it slows down and things start taking shape. Probably like a blender. I believe there have all been, we have all experienced moments where we were rather unsure about what we want to do with the work. So you go in the studio and you start trying out, and then you throw it away and then drop it and go home and do something else. Then the next day you experiment more and you try whether it is, oh, draw this or that, or I take this photograph, or put these things together, or let's see if this magazine or this video gives me ideas, or I read this book, and you just try, and so you're just throwing things in. And then at a point, something sticks, and then you repeat it. And then you repeat it and it alters it a bit, and then something else maybe can fit into it, and progressively, one out of endless possible distributions starts taking place. So there's the mad spinning of this orgy of parts and possibilities and of things that don't yet have meaning takes a shape and a form meaning. So to me, what I find extremely interesting in this is that the order, the distribution, the physical distribution of all this flesh takes place first, and it is a taking place that is making place. The distribution happens, and then the meaning arises. If you think of the traditional approach to art that is still practiced now, when you need always a curator to explain what the work is about. You always need a big text at the beginning of the room of the museum to introduce you to that, as if your eyes would not be enough, your senses would not be enough, or your emotion would not be enough to engage with that. What is happening here with this mad, spinning, orgiastic mixing of things, experimenting with things, and then the progressive slowing down and acquiring body. Now the body happens before the meaning, before the signifier, before the text that describes it. So it really, although it is indeed text, it is indeed written in a book, it gives a completely different entryway into this position of, these THIS, the position of trying to make sense, to generate sense, which is, at this point becomes precisely the opposite than representing sense.
I'm just making a note.
Okay. So what seemed zero, the nothing here, is really the culprit, but is not happening all by itself. It's installed, it's generated by the discourse, it's the paradigm for organizing the way we live, the way we act. And this is what he's trying to undermine. And then it goes on to the position that it reaches in the end is that one constantly, it gets closer to Derrida, if you like. One constantly tries to bring back what is being separated from the zero, but can never do it, because the ruling setup is language, which is a position common to all. That they all share, him, Deleuze, Derrida, all the group. That moment in the passing from modern to postmodern, late 60s, early 70s, is concerned with this problem. And now to them it seemed inseparable. So one will always be the one that can never reach everything.
But even Heidegger came up with that conclusion, and it goes back to what Natalia was saying, that language is so deeply embedded, or metaphysics is so deeply embedded in language that you can't. And that's what I was going to ask earlier. Was when Heidegger talks about springing out of it, is it the same as the breaking up of the what do you call it? The breaking up.
The opening up of the
yeah.
Yes, Lyotard draws it from there, but I think by bringing in the body, the flesh, the sexuality, the pain, so brutally, Lyotard makes, it's not that it is far better, but expands or explains the problem that Heidegger had started or explained in the first place, in a way that is far more articulated, because Heidegger speaks of a problem of ontology. It's very abstract, and it is true. He is speaking, looking backward to 4 or 5 centuries of philosophy and of European culture that only reason in abstract terms. And he shows somehow he put the key in the door, and Lyotard just take the key, gives all the possible twists he can, and then blows the door open, saying, well, actually the problem is that all this part of the body, all this part of the desire come up from an alleged deep, dark bottom of the pit, which is actually not there, and that's the problem we have, should also be brought in all together, mix it all up, creating huge mess, and then start reasoning from that point. So there is somehow, to me, Lyotard opens up all that was tightly packed in Heidegger with this kind of problem. Although he also then, it's very rich. There is Marxism coming in, the Freudian bit, but the radical point is that is moving from the problem related by Heidegger that says language is the paradigm of our culture, and it has separated these from that is here. We managed to read 3 pages. Fantastic. Does it make? Did it help understand more? Yes.
I was going to ask, do we know actually how Lyotard would have expected us to read this sort of text? Because it strikes me that, I've read somewhere, that one of the reasons he wrote in this obscure manner was to sort of offset the sort of linear and logical approach to analysis. And yet here we are trying to analyse all these sort of almost incomprehensible things bit by bit and put them together in a way we can understand it. Would he have wanted us to do that? Or would he just want us to go with the flow and read it?
I don't know. What I find, as I was saying, I find this text very poetic. So one can spend an afternoon on 3 pages linking the rest of the book to it, or another work. So it is something that can be very dense, or seen as a whole. Then you have to read your book and give a 20-minute presentation or a book review, or play with all these resonances of this word and that word, and the images and where they come from. I see the point.
I remember Heidegger, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think it was in sort of the beginning somewhere of the problem with technology, or where he said, don't get hung up on each individual point, just go with the flow. That's not actually what he said.
Yes.
And I just wonder if that's how we're meant to read this, sort of immerse ourselves.
I don't know, but this was a book that Lyotard wrote to beyond the provoke French culture. Was, if you allow me the special to piss them off. Because there are somewhere, he lost a lot of friends that were more straightforward Marxist with this, because he attacks the whole idea later in the book. He attacks the idea of alienation by saying that the alienated worker in the capitalist regime has actually lost nothing, because there was no original individual that was a whole individual at the beginning, which has been deprived of something. What has instead happened, but this is the root of the Marxist approach, recuperating the value stolen by the capitalist system on the worker. While what he's saying is that what is happening is that the device, the dispositive, the great zero, is set in and captures endless other possibilities of development. So he's putting on the same side capitalism and Marxism as when systems that generate direct linear economies. Why am I saying these now? I lost my thread.
It was about his style. Why
yes. So the whole book is meant so much as a provocation that yes, you can take it as an old thing or spend. I just used. I would find very, very difficult to speak of this book without referring to the text, because I don't know. I rather it's so complex and so fast at the same, so literary at the same time. then one way in that I find easier to manage is to stick to the text and then really listen to it poetically. So from a word go very far and then come back. And also, indeed, as you notice now, the sentence is longer than the paragraph, which is a paragraph in itself. That's precisely what we would like want to say about this. There is, but it speaks of excess at a certain point.
It's going to be a translator's nightmare, because he says at the start that he's trying to translate it directly.
And he just gave up.
Well, I think Theatard also referred to this as his evil book.
Yes.
I was very happy that it wasn't widely read.
Has he
But
ever you know about these little short books?
Mm-hmm.
Has he written anything like that? Did he ever write anything that was
Yes,
useful?
later on.
Right.
These one, for example, just short.
Oh, right.
White to philosophize. Plenty of white pages at the end. Pretty very big, 123 pages. So that's far more manageable. He has also written more cumbersome bits about art and philosophy. But his whole point is that the question is, how do you get to experience? How do you get to that moment where you and the tool you're using are no longer two separated things? So that, let's make an example. You might have all experienced it. There are some moments when you work where you can listen to music. You cannot listen to music while reading something. It distracts you, or you don't hear the music. But you can work between quotation with your hands, which is not only with your hands, obviously, while the music goes, and you follow the music fully, and you are also following fully what you're making. Because text somehow captures and organizes things in a very specific way, and then everything has to flow through it. It's like only one person can pass at a time. Instead, two flows can go through while working with something that's essential, which doesn't mean that it has to be material as in the sculpture or painting or anything else. But you can video edit and listen to music. You can whatever devise a performance or. Because the distance is no longer there. You are trying to follow the dimensions of what you're working with. And that is a moment of openness, is that big mix. But then when you're asked to describe it, or you're asked to follow somebody else's description, then you have to shut down all your gates and have only one port open. So that's the problem that he has with which is constantly going back to analyze between some alleged reality and the signifier of language, which has pushed it far, and somehow something that was all mixed together, not one unit, something was a mix that had endless forms, known and endless at the same time, was divided. And now there is a very specific form, I am here, that's there, and I am person, and this is an object, and so forth. So it is really stopping time from flowing. Doing here and give it an order like that. I find that anytime somebody asks me, "Oh, what did you mean with this piece of work?" Well, that's precisely what I wanted to capture. What does it mean? I don't know. Look at it. What does it make you think? How do you hate it? Fine. Do you like it? Fine. Why? Only you can tell. No, I cannot explain to you. I can give you reasons. No, I can tell you what I did before, what I think of it, but then we are on the same side. I am a viewer of my own work as much as you are. And this is not being a romantic artist that is somehow mystically in touch with who knows what. It's precisely because there is no thing that one is working on the boundary with. So everything can be remixed. This is probably I am now pushing my interpretation of the text a bit, but is why it speaks to art making, to the position of the artist so much. This is why we read it in the seminar here. I'll finish at 7:30 generally, or yeah. I just didn't want to. Just to give you another couple of elements. On page 12 and 13, he jumps to something entirely, apparently entirely different. Is
It's just what I was talking about.
is speaking of panic and philosophers and panic, settling down, sedentarization again, one soon stops nomadizing, all these differences between motion, possibly disordered motion or motion without aim, and order and becoming sedentary. And then pain coming back into it very so often as another problem. And where is it? Halfway through the second paragraph on page 12, he writes, but these disfigurations rarely take place, thank God. Even today's scientists are starting out on the road to pain. You find it?
Yes, I.
Letting their little suffering subside, their little scandal, their petty dialectic, and the wretched labor of the concept. You see, look how labor comes back. They know that this is deception itself. That what works is not the concept, that the concept is capital. Sorry, what works is not the concept, that the concept is capital, which pretends. Forgive me. They know that this is deception itself, that what works is not the concept, that the concept is capital, which pretends to work, and which determines the condition of labor. The capital pretends to work, but in reality it determines how we are working, how things are distributed. The limits, the outside and insides, authorizes and the authorized and the prohibited, selects and valorizes, invests, realize that the concept is trade, going back and forth over the equal sign. This is work that. The concept is trade. But that the movement, the strength of trade is not the concept. This wretched little suffering of the academic radical socialist. But then he jumps, so the academic radical socialist is pretending or hoping to analyze trade and improve it, and instead is trapped into it. Our great mathematician, those whom we love, our brothers in pain.
It's
What?
no, it's different in
Oh.
brief panic. I can't.
So go
Brief
down,
panic,
no,
at the
just
bottom
sort
of the paragraph after
where you
brief
were,
panic.
just with the turning the bar,
Yeah.
that subtitle there, which is
Yeah.
further down, and it's
it's
like
down,
two
isn't
paragraphs down from there.
Oh yeah, there. I did highlight it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And then the last bit, because this is become somehow explains. Our great mathematician, those whom we love, our brothers in pain and joy, how, he's speaking to this messy, fleshy situation. He puts the philosopher and the radical socialist on one side, and then we see how close it can be to art. And then he says, oh, I'm siding with the mathematicians. Why how is he getting there? And the mathematicians know very well that this is not even correct, that this is futile trade over the zero. And almost based to say with the last mile, yes, all that we do is only a game. Yes, we quite understand that there is only the great zero and that one can only turn about it like a vast spectacle. They know as well as we do that it is not at all a question of a game, that one never leaves the sham seriousness of the concept for the facsimile of the game. And then what Marx had said earlier, just jumping lower. Where is this? Roman pain and joy. Okay, the stage play that Augustine despises and adores, so representation, the sign for the signified, are in no way simulacra of another reality. So we remember we spoke of zero that would have been taken as the luck, something that was there, should have been on this side. The stage masks could not be the popular and political version of serious divinity. The nothing with which the philosopher and priests, so the philosopher arrogate for themselves a certain authority as if they were priests, have furnished us as the maximum and optimum of consciousness or knowledge or wisdom, of consciousness or knowledge of wisdom, and thanks to which the vivacious and deadly intensities that shoot across us shall be discredited. This nothing, this is what I was aiming at, is their desire that produces it. It is not it that produces their desire. These intensities do not in any way proceed from the illusion of changing the investment in mobile circles, but is the opposite. They can engender these as the center of a concentratory disposition, also called the proper body, the ego, society, and so forth. But this nothing, it is their desire that produces it. That work of desire that creates the stage, by creating the stage, creates the boundary. By creating the boundary, sets up an inclusion and exclusion, an inside and an outside, a value and an object, something that we have and something that we're lacking and we want to bring back. So the game that is happening here is precisely that this intense energy of desiring, of wanting, is setting up continuously its own destruction. But it's also, this is, since you like to pair it up with Heidegger, which is correct, plays as in Heidegger game the fact that by setting up a stage covers his traces among its own steps. The fact that the stage is set up is one of the many options. So it becomes absolute. And it is the root, the instinct, the knot on which power, any form of power, rests upon. The fact that you turn something that has generated into something absolute. A decision that has been taken communally as something that the assembly can no longer change, because you've elected me president and now I am so now I've got the power, I don't allow you to put in. So there is this covering up, this concealing, to referring to Heidegger, and this is what becomes a dispositive. So the zero that separates is also concealing the separation, if you like. It is set as something in between. It pretends to be nothing, but it is. If it were really nothing, it would not separate anything. Have you got any more questions?
Just kind of skipping forward to the tensor,
Yes.
and just going back to what you were talking about now about concealing. It reads, the sign at once screens and calls up what is both.
Which page would be on?
Sorry, so I'm just reading from a. So it's the first page of the tensor.
Let's take up this business of science once more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just reading from a different copy of it. It's the second. So the paragraph that starts with therefore then, or immediately then.
Immediately then, as
Yeah.
hypothesis.
A couple of lines down. I'm just going to read from this translation where it talks about the sign at once screens and calls up what it both announces and conceals.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a note asking whether this is a relation to the dwelling that hides and exposes.
Yes, absolutely.
So the dwelling then is what you were talking about, this kind of is the dwelling then the stage?
Well, it is a dwelling on the staging.
Right.
So, did you ever see, either Persona of Bergman or Kagemusha, the Shadow of the Warrior of Kurosawa? They are both very, very entirely different films, but where in The Shadow of the Warrior there is a Japanese feudal lord who is at war with somebody else, and need a sosia in order to will go in public. So if someone wants to murder him, they will murder the sosia. And then it happens that in a battle by mere chance, the real lord is killed by something like an arrow. I don't remember. He's killed by mistake, and the sosia progressively identifies himself with the real person. The reader doesn't even know that the real person is dead until much later in the story. Gosh, I'm losing my thread a lot. So yes, the staging, the setting up of a sign plays along a similar line where you're staging something, you're the sosia, and then you forget that you have become the sosia, and you shifted back to match with the person you're supposed to impersonate. So you forget that there was a distance there. I mean, in this case, it's not that you forget that there's a distance between a signified and a signified. You forget that this distribution is a setup. And there could be another one. There could be something that is otherwise. It's completely undefined, is otherwise. But there could be, the distribution could be otherwise than signified, than noun object. It could be something else that is very rigid grid, where to each cup corresponds the main cup. To each artist must correspond a specific medium, or if it doesn't, then you have to call yourself a multidisciplinary artist, because otherwise you need a name. You cannot go by without a name. That's the problem is ultimately aiming at. And every time you start changing names, well, this is even a crime, I guess. Pretending to be who you're not, isn't it? So obviously it's very much radicated in our order of thinking. But on the other hand,
whether there would be any thinking without the signifiers and the person.
yes. So that's why the whole situation for Lyotard is paradoxical. And there's an extreme important value.
And breaks down.
Well, continuously break down.
Yeah.
But that's also, I think, why it's interesting to consider this problem in an art school, because we are sort of trying to stay
Right,
in between,
yeah.
and obviously we can up to a certain point, and it is up to us, or down to us, whichever expression you want to use, to decide how much we are accepting of the existing paradigm and how much we are disordering of it. And the amount of one and the other is the work we make. If it would be completely, entirely disordered,
It would be a soup with amoebas, even not amoebas, not amoebas. Amoebas?
it would be,
It's the word.
yeah, it would be beyond the recognition in
Even
real
that
terms.
wouldn't, because cell has got a boundary. It would be just soup
Yeah.
without a boundary.
Yeah, but even without going down to breaking things down to the atomic layer. If you think of an artist or a piece of work that is, between quotations, so far ahead than what is done now, that it doesn't have any link with what is being done now, nobody would appreciate it. You need to retain at least some elements so you can see why the others are so innovative, so original.
Well, it's in Nietzsche, isn't it, that you can never read in a book or understand from a conversation anything that you don't know already.
As well. So then what you can take away of new from that is very, very minimal.
But that was your comment about the kind of curators trying to translate, putting up these big plaques. I mean, it's when you're trying to, it's kind of historical kind of based idea of curating, but curating kind of work that we make as a group. There's almost no.
Yeah, but because
it's still making its own history.
Oh yes. I'm sorry, they're two different things. I mean,
Yeah.
that was it was a passing example, but the idea that there would be a predominance of the text over any other form of making or working or thinking is why I brought it up there. But obviously, that is. I see why you're saying this now. It sort of tries to draw more links that are immediately visible. This is what you're saying, writing the text about something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. good then. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.
I hope to do that again in the future. I enjoy these.